You walk through the city and no one knows you. The faces stream past like water, thousands of them, and not one pauses on yours with recognition. Not one softens with familiarity. You could disappear into the crowd, and no absence would register. No one would notice the space where you had been. This is normal now. This is how you live. But somewhere in the back of your mind, in a place you rarely visit, there's a question forming, a quiet unease. When did this become normal? When did the world fill up with strangers? You pass the same coffee shop every morning, and the barista doesn't know your name. She's friendly enough, professional, but you are one face in an endless sequence of faces. You order the same thing most days and she doesn't remember. Why would she? There are hundreds of you. Hundreds of orders. The transaction is smooth and impersonal, and you accept this because what else is there? You take your coffee and you leave, and you walk among thousands more who don't know you, who will never know you, who are solving their own private equations of anonymity. This is the texture of your days. You live surrounded by people, and yet you move through a kind of solitude that would have been unimaginable to almost everyone who came before you. You swipe through faces on screens. You sit in meetings with colleagues whose children's names you don't know. You ride elevators with neighbors whose voices you've never heard. And this seems fine. This seems like just the way things are. Until late at night, when the noise dies down and you're alone with yourself. And something in you wonders what was lost in this exchange. The city promises everything. It promises opportunity and choice and the freedom to reinvent yourself as many times as you want. It promises that you can be anyone, which is perhaps another way of saying you don't have to be anyone in particular. No one is watching. No one is keeping track. You can slip between versions of yourself, and no one will notice the contradictions because no one knew the earlier versions. This is supposed to be liberating, and maybe it is. But maybe it's also the source of something else, something harder to name. You scroll through your phone, and you have hundreds of contacts, maybe thousands of connections on various platforms. And yet, when you think about who really knows you, the list grows very short, very quickly. Who knows the whole story? Who has seen you across years, across changes, is across the different rooms of your life? Who remembers what you were like before you became what you are now? The answer is almost no one, because you've moved too many times, changed contexts too many times, let too many connections drift into that category of people you used to know, and this is normal. Everyone you know lives this way. Everyone has left people behind, has lost touch, has friends scattered across cities and time zones who exist now mostly as occasional digital check-ins. Everyone is starting over in small ways all the time, always explaining themselves to new people, always beginning again from zero. It's exhausting in a way you don't quite acknowledge. The constant low-level effort of being unknown, of carrying your own context because no one else will carry it for you. You think about the word stranger and how it used to mean something. A stranger was unusual. A stranger was someone from elsewhere, someone whose face you didn't recognize, whose family you didn't know, whose business in your town was mysterious. Now, strangers are the default. Everyone is a stranger except for a handful of people you've deliberately chosen to let in. And even they know only the parts of you that exist in their presence. You are fragmented across different relationships, different contexts, and no one sees the whole. There's a kind of freedom in this. You can be different things to different people. You can emphasize certain parts of yourself and let other parts recede. You can curate the version of you that feels right for each context. But there's also a kind of exhaustion, a kind of loneliness that comes from never being fully seen, never being known in the complete and unself-conscious way that requires years and proximity and the kind of entanglement that modern life tells you to avoid. Because modern life values independence. It values the ability to move, to change, to keep your options open. It tells you not to get too rooted, too dependent, too known, because that limits your freedom. That makes you predictable. That pins you to a place and a role and a set of expectations you might one day want to escape. So you stay light, you stay flexible, you stay ready to move. And the cost of this is that you live among strangers, and you are a stranger to almost everyone. And the deep animal part of you that evolved in small groups of familiar faces never quite adjusts to this. You feel it sometimes in crowds. That particular loneliness that only comes from being surrounded by people. You're in the subway or the airport or walking down a busy street, and there are humans everywhere. More humans than any of your ancestors would have encountered in months, maybe years. And yet, you feel profoundly alone because none of them know you. None of them would help you if you fell. None of them are connected to you by anything except the temporary sharing of space. You are in proximity without intimacy. You are together but separate. And some part of you registers this as wrong, as a violation of how things are supposed to be, even though you can't quite articulate why. The unease sits in your body. You try to explain it sometimes, to friends, to therapists, to yourself late at night. You try to say that something feels off. Then that despite all the people in your life you feel disconnected, that you're tired of introducing yourself, tired of explaining your history, tired of the work of being new. But it's hard to make this sound like a real problem because objectively, your life is fine. You have friends, you have connections, you're not isolated in any obvious way. And yet the feeling persists, the sense that you're floating, that you're not anchored, that no one is holding the story of who you are. You wonder sometimes if this is just what modern life is. If the price of freedom and opportunity and choice is this particular species of loneliness. If the city gives you everything except the one thing humans evolved to need most, the experience of being known, really known, known across time, known in context, and known by people who remember what you were like at different ages, who can see the arc of you, who carry pieces of your story without you having to explain. You think about your grandmother sometimes, though you didn't know her well. She lived her entire life in the same small town. She knew everyone, and everyone knew her. She walked to the store and people greeted her by name. She went to the same church for 70 years. She was buried in a cemetery where she could name every other person interred. Her life was small by modern standards. She never traveled far. She never reinvented herself. She was always who she was, known by the same people, held in the same web of recognition. And you used to think of this as limited, as narrow, as the kind of life you would never want. But lately, you wonder. Oh, you wonder what it felt like to be that known. To walk through your days surrounded by people who had seen you grow up, who remembered your parents, who could place you in the larger story of the community. To never have to explain yourself because your life was lived in public, in the slow accumulation of shared knowledge. To be held in collective memory. You wonder if there was a kind of peace in that, a kind of rest that you've never experienced and maybe never will, because you will never be that known. You will never live anywhere long enough. You will never stay still enough. You will move and change and reinvent, and in doing so, you will remain fundamentally unknown, carrying your own story, explaining yourself over and over to new audiences who will never quite get it because they weren't there. Because they don't have the full context, because knowing someone completely requires time and proximity and the kind of stability that modern life actively discourages. And so you live with this strange ache, this sense of being surrounded by people and yet unseen, of having hundreds of connections and yet being fundamentally alone with yourself, of being free to be anyone and yet having no one who knows who you actually are. It's the trade you've made, the trade everyone makes now. Opportunity for anonymity, freedom for disconnection, the chance to become anything for the cost of being no one in particular to almost everyone. The question that haunts you, late at night when the city finally quiets, is whether this is sustainable, whether humans can really live this way. Whether you can keep moving through crowds of strangers without some part of you starting to come undone. Whether the freedom is worth the loneliness. Whether the opportunity is worth the anonymity. Whether becoming anyone is worth the cost of being fully known by no one. You don't have an answer. You just have the question, and the unease, and the sense that something about the way you live now is at odds with something very old in you, something that remembers, even if you don't, what it was like to be seen, to be known, to walk through your days surrounded not by strangers, but by eyes that recognized you, that knew your name without asking, that held you in a web of belonging you didn't have to earn because you were already part of it, just by being there, just by staying. But you didn't stay. No one stays anymore. And so you walk among strangers, and you are a stranger, and the unease persists, quiet and constant, like a low hum you've learned to ignore, but never completely escape. Think back far enough and none of this existed. The crowds, the anonymity, the daily encounter with thousands of faces you'll never see again. Go back far enough and the human experience was the opposite of what you know now. For most of human history, you were born into a world of familiar faces, and you died still seeing those same faces, aged but recognizable, part of the same small circle of recognition that defined your entire existence. You would have known everyone in your village. Not casually, not the way you know your neighbours now, with brief nods and occasional small talk. You would have known them completely, known their families going back generations, known their temperaments, their skills, their stories, known who was reliable and who wasn't, who was generous and who was stingy, who could be trusted with secrets and who couldn't. This knowledge wasn't something you accumulated deliberately. It was just the texture of life. You grew up watching the same people. You saw them at their best and worst. You knew them. The village was small. Maybe 100 people, maybe fewer. Everyone living in proximity, their lives overlapping and entangled in ways that would feel claustrophobic to you now. There was no privacy in the modern sense. People knew your business because your business happened in view. They knew if your marriage was struggling because they heard the arguments. They knew if your children were difficult because they saw the interactions. They knew if you were doing well or poorly because the signs were visible. Your life was not your own in any private sense. It was shared. It was communal. It was part of the larger story of the group. And this meant something profound. It meant you could not be a stranger to the people around you, even if you wanted to be. You could not reinvent yourself because everyone knew the earlier versions. You could not hide your failures because everyone had witnessed them. You could not escape your reputation because it was built on decades of observation by people who had no reason to give you the benefit of the doubt. You were known completely, and this knowing was both comfort and cage. When you walked through the village, every face was familiar. The old woman sitting outside her house had been old your entire life. You remembered her as younger, though still old to your child eyes. You knew her story. Her husband dead 20 years. Her sons moved to the next valley. Her hands always busy with some kind of work. She knew you too. Knew you as a baby, as a difficult toddler, as a restless adolescent. She had watched you grow. She had opinions about you based on years of observation. When she looked at you, she didn't see a stranger. She saw the whole arc of you. The blacksmith who shoed your father's horse knew your grandfather. He remembered the old feuds, the old alliances, the old debts. He knew which families were trustworthy and which weren't. He knew your family's reputation, and he held you accountable to it. When you dealt with him, you weren't just yourself. You were part of a lineage, part of a story that extended backward in time and would extend forward after you were gone. He treated you according to this knowledge. You couldn't escape it. You couldn't be someone new to him because he had too much context. Every interaction was layered with history. When you borrowed something from a neighbor, both of you remembered the last time something was borrowed and whether it was returned promptly. When you made a promise, people judged its likely fulfillment based on your past behavior and your family's past behavior. Nothing happened in isolation. Everything was part of a pattern. You were always being held accountable to what came before. This was oppressive in ways you can barely imagine now. You had no anonymity, no fresh starts, no ability to leave behind your mistakes and begin again somewhere else. If you did something shameful, everyone knew. If you failed at something, it became part of your permanent record in the collective memory of the village. You were stuck with your reputation, stuck with the role you'd been assigned or had fallen into, stuck being seen in a particular way by people who would never update their assessment because they'd known you too long. But it also meant you belonged, completely and irrevocably. You belonged because you were known, because your presence was expected, because your absence would be noticed immediately. If you didn't appear at the well in the morning, people would wonder why. If you missed the market day, someone would come looking. Not because you were particularly special, but because you were part of the pattern of the village. And when part of the pattern was missing, everyone felt it. You never had to introduce yourself. You never had to explain who you were, or where you came from, or what your story was. Everyone already knew. They knew your parents and grandparents. They knew the land your family worked. They knew your struggles and your strengths. This knowledge was oppressive, but it was also a kind of cushion. You were held, remembered, part of something larger than yourself. You mattered not because of any individual achievement, but because you were woven into the fabric of collective life. You were a thread in the tapestry, and if you were pulled out, the pattern would be altered. The children you grew up with stayed. They didn't go away to school or move to distant cities or scatter across the world. They married people from your village or the next village over. They had children who played with your children. You watched them age. You saw them become parents and then grandparents. You attended their weddings and their funerals. The whole arc of life played out in front of you, with the same cast of characters, and this created a continuity of experience that modern life makes impossible. You knew what people looked like at every age. You knew the young man in the old man's face. You knew the girl in the grandmother's gestures. You carried decades of memory about the people around you, and they carried decades of memory about you. This made every interaction rich with context. When you spoke to someone, you weren't just speaking to who they were now. You were speaking to the accumulated history of them, to all the versions of them you'd known. And they were speaking to all the versions of you. Time moved differently when lived this way. It wasn't a series of discrete chapters with different settings and different people. It was a single continuous story with the same people aging in place. You watched your neighbours' children grow up. You saw marriages succeed and fail. You witnessed the slow accumulation of wealth or the gradual slide into poverty. Nothing happened suddenly because you were always there watching. The changes were incremental, visible only because you had the full context of before and after. And this meant you understood cause and effect in a visceral way. You saw how decisions played out over years. You saw how a young person's character predicted their older self. You saw patterns repeat across generations. The son who drank like his father. The daughter who was sharp-tongued like her mother. The families that always struggled and the families that always managed. You learned about life by watching it happen to people you knew over and over in the same small space. The village was its own world, self-contained. The boundaries were clear. Beyond the village were other villages, other towns, other places you might visit occasionally, but that weren't really yours. Your world was the people you saw every day, the faces that were familiar, the names you knew. This made the world manageable, knowable. You didn't have to navigate complexity beyond what you could directly observe. You didn't have to trust strangers or deal with institutions or manage relationships with people you'd never met. Everything happened face to face, with people you knew according to rules everyone understood. This was limiting in obvious ways. Your possibilities were constrained by the possibilities of the village. If no one knew how to do something, it didn't get done. If no one had a particular skill or knowledge, you did without. Your understanding of the world was limited to what you could observe and what the older people could tell you about. You had no access to the accumulated knowledge of humanity. No books, or very few. No schools beyond what the village could provide. No experts except the people who were locally considered expert. Your world was small, and your knowledge was small, and your options were small. But you were never lonely in the particular way modern people are lonely. You were never anonymous. You were never navigating a world full of strangers who didn't care whether you lived or died. You were surrounded by people who knew you, who expected you, who would notice your absence. This wasn't necessarily love. It wasn't necessarily kindness. Some of these people probably didn't like you much. Some you probably didn't like. But you were bound together anyway, by proximity and necessity and the simple fact of shared life. When you needed help, you knew who to ask. When you had something to celebrate, you knew who would come. When you died, you knew who would bury you and who would remember you and where your body would rest. There was a certainty to it all, a knowability. Your life would unfold in predictable ways, among predictable people, and this was both prison and protection. You couldn't escape, but you also couldn't fall through the cracks. You were held in place by the same forces that constrained you. The market square was the heart of this, the place where people gathered, where goods were exchanged, and news was shared, and faces were seen. You went to the market, and everyone you encountered was familiar. The woman selling eggs was the same woman who always sold eggs. The man repairing tools was the same man your father brought tools to. The children running between the stalls were children you knew, whose parents you knew, whose grandparents you knew. There were no strangers in the market square. There were only neighbours. You could stand in the square and see the whole social fabric of your world on display. The hierarchies were visible. Who deferred to whom? Who was prosperous and who was struggling? Who was respected and who was marginalized? You knew all of this without being told, because you'd watched these relationships develop over years. You knew the history behind every interaction. The old grudges and the old alliances, the debts owed and the favors remembered. Nothing happened in isolation. Everything was connected to everything else through the web of relationships that defined village life. And when a stranger did appear, it was an event. Someone from another village, or a traveling merchant, or someone passing through on their way somewhere else. They stood out immediately because they didn't fit the pattern. They were unknown. No one could vouch for them. No one knew their family or their reputation, or whether they could be trusted. They were treated with caution, with curiosity, with the particular kind of attention you give to something that doesn't belong. They were strange in the literal sense. They were from outside the circle of recognition. And their presence reminded you of what you had, a place where you were known, where you weren't the stranger. You took this for granted, the way you take anything for granted when you've never known its absence. The experience of being recognized, of walking through your days surrounded by familiar faces, of never having to explain who you were because everyone already knew. It didn't feel special. It felt normal. It felt like just the way life was. You didn't appreciate it because you had nothing to compare it to. You didn't know that one day this would be rare, that one day people would live surrounded by strangers and think this was normal, that the experience of being deeply known by the people around you would become something precious and unusual rather than the default condition of human life. But you also didn't romanticize it, and you knew the downsides intimately, the gossip, the judgment, the inability to escape your past or your family's past, the way people's opinions of you calcified over time and became impossible to change, the suffocating sense that everyone was watching, everyone had opinions, everyone felt entitled to weigh in on your choices, the lack of privacy, the lack of freedom. The way your individual desires were constantly subordinated to the needs and expectations of the group. You dreamed sometimes of leaving, of going somewhere no one knew you, somewhere you could be different, be new, be free of all the accumulated history that weighed on you in the village. You imagined what it would be like to walk among strangers, to be anonymous, to have no reputation to uphold, and no expectations to meet. It seemed liberating. It seemed like it would solve all the problems that came from being too known, too seen, too entangled in other people's judgments and memories. And if you were lucky or unlucky enough to actually leave, to go to a city or a foreign place, you discovered something unexpected. The freedom was real. No one knew you, and this meant no one could judge you based on your past. You could be anyone. You could reinvent yourself. You could escape all the constraints of the village. But you also discovered the loneliness, the particular alienation of being surrounded by people who didn't know you and never would, the exhaustion of always being new, the absence of the very thing you'd taken for granted, the experience of being held in collective memory, of mattering not for what you achieved, but simply because you were part of the fabric of life. You couldn't go back. Not really. Once you'd left, once you'd experienced the freedom of anonymity, the village felt too small, too constraining. The very things that had oppressed you were the things that had held you. And now that you were free of them, you felt the absence of that holding. You were floating, unmoored, known by no one, and some part of you understood, too late, what you'd lost. But let's be clear about what was lost. Let's not slip into easy nostalgia, because the village was not paradise. Being known by everyone was not some simple good. It came with costs that are easy to forget when you're drowning in modern anonymity. You were trapped by that knowing, trapped by reputation, trapped by expectations. If you were born into a family of farmers, you were a farmer. If you were born to a carpenter, you learned carpentry. Your possibilities were determined before you were old enough to have preferences. The village had roles to fill, and you filled the role you were given. There was no career counseling, no exploration of your unique talents and interests, no question of what you might become. You became what you were expected to become, what the village needed you to become, what your family's position allowed you to become. If you were a woman, the constraints were even tighter. You were someone's daughter, and then someone's wife, and then someone's mother. That was the arc. That was the story. There was no room for deviation, no room for wanting something else, no room for being something other than what women in the village had always been. You were watched and judged and constrained by generations of expectations about how women should behave. The knowing that held you also controlled you. The same people who would notice your absence were the people who policed your behavior. And if you were different in any way that the village didn't understand or accept, you suffered. If you didn't want to marry, if you were attracted to the wrong people, if you thought differently or questioned the old ways or wanted something the village couldn't provide, you were marked, you were judged, you were pressured to conform or else marginalized, excluded, made to feel that your difference was a problem that needed correcting. The intimacy of village life left no room for real privacy, for interiority, for the parts of yourself that didn't fit the acceptable patterns. The same mechanisms that created belonging created enforcement. People knew you so well, they knew when you were deviating from expectations. They knew when you were struggling with something you weren't supposed to struggle with. They knew when you were unhappy in ways you weren't supposed to be unhappy. And because they knew, they intervened. They had opinions. They gave advice you didn't ask for. They told you what you should do, how you should feel, who you should be. The web of recognition was also a web of control. And this created a particular kind of psychological pressure. You learned to internalize the village's gaze. You learned to police yourself because you knew you were always being watched. You learned to hide the parts of yourself that didn't fit. You learned to perform the role you'd been given, even when it chafed, even when it hurt, because the cost of refusing was too high. Exile is exclusion, the loss of the only belonging you'd ever known. So you complied. Most people complied. They buried their true selves under the acceptable self, and they lived that way until they died. The village was also not kind in the way modern people imagine kindness. It was a hard world, a world of scarcity and labor and early death. People were pragmatic, unsentimental. If you couldn't work, you were a burden. If you were sick or disabled or too old to contribute, you survived on the charity of family or community, but that charity was often grudging. People helped because they had to, because social pressure demanded it, not because they wanted to. The web of obligation that bound the village together was not based on affection. It was based on necessity. You watched people die young. Childbirth killed women regularly. Infections killed children. Accidents killed workers. Old age came early, at 40 or 50, bodies worn out by labor. The deaths were public. Everyone knew. Everyone attended the funerals. The grief was shared, but it was also commonplace. Death was part of the texture of village life. You didn't have the luxury of being traumatized by it. You mourned, and then you continued, because there was no other option. The hierarchies were rigid. If you were born poor, you stayed poor. If you were born to low status, you stayed low status. The knowing that made you belong also locked you into place. Everyone knew where you came from. Everyone knew what your family was. Everyone treated you accordingly. There was no social mobility, no chance to rise above your station through talent or effort. The village remembered your origins and held you to them. And if you made a mistake, if you did something shameful or criminal or just stupid, the village never forgot. Your reputation was permanent. You could spend the rest of your life trying to atone, and it wouldn't matter. People would still remember. They would still bring it up. They would still treat you as the person who did that thing. You were stuck with your worst moments forever. There was no moving to a new city and starting fresh. There was no reinvention. You were what you were and what you'd done, and you would die being seen that way. The village also enforced conformity in ways that could be brutal. If you were different, if you didn't fit, the social pressure to conform was immense. People would gossip. They would exclude. They would make your life difficult until you either changed or left. The intimacy of village life meant there was nowhere to hide. Everyone knew your business. Everyone had opinions about your business. Everyone felt entitled to enforce the norms. And those norms were often narrow and rigid and hostile to anything that didn't fit the traditional patterns. So when you feel nostalgic for the world of familiar faces, for the market square where everyone knew your name, remember what came with that knowing. Remember the constriction, the judgment, the inability to escape your past or choose your future. Remember that the belonging was real, but the cost was also real. The village held you, but it also caged you. The recognition was total, but the freedom was minimal. You were seen, but you were also controlled. Well, this matters because the nostalgia you feel isn't really for the village itself. You wouldn't actually want to live there. You wouldn't want to trade your freedom for that kind of belonging. You wouldn't want to give up privacy and choice and the ability to reinvent yourself. You wouldn't want to be trapped in a role, judged by everyone, unable to escape your reputation or your family's reputation. You know this. Intellectually, you know this. But emotionally, some part of you still aches for what the village provided. Not the specific constraints, but the underlying experience. The experience of being known, of being part of something, of mattering in a way that wasn't dependent on your achievements or your performance, but simply on your existence as part of the fabric of collective life. This is what you miss. This is what modern life doesn't provide. Not the village itself, but the kind of belonging the village created as a side effect of its constraints. And this is the trap of nostalgia. It makes you long for something you can't actually have. because the belonging and the constraint were inseparable. You can't extract the warm feeling of recognition from the oppressive reality of total surveillance. You can't have the security of being known without the limitation of being defined. The village was a package deal. You got all of it or none of it. And your ancestors, many of them, chose none of it. They left. They went to cities. They chose freedom over belonging. They chose possibility over recognition. They chose to become strangers. This wasn't a mistake. It was a rational choice. The constraints of village life were real and painful, and for many people, unbearable. The freedom of the city, despite its loneliness, was genuinely preferable to the suffocation of total knowing. People left the village not because they didn't understand what they were losing, but because they understood very well what they were gaining. The chance to be themselves, to choose their own path, to escape the judgment and the expectations and the rigid roles, to live as individuals rather than as fixed points in a static social structure. And once enough people made that choice, once enough people left for the cities, the village itself changed. It couldn't sustain the old patterns when people were mobile, when alternatives existed, when the young people kept leaving. The web of recognition weakened. The collective memory fragmented. As the village became a less intense version of itself, and eventually it became something else entirely. Something more like what you know now. A place where people live but don't necessarily belong, where recognition is partial rather than total, where you can be somewhat known but also somewhat anonymous. So the world you're nostalgic for is gone. It's been gone for generations. It ended not because of some external catastrophe, but because people chose to end it. They chose cities over villages. They chose freedom over belonging. They chose the possibility of being anyone over the certainty of being someone in particular. And that choice created the world you live in now. A world of strangers and anonymity and loneliness, but also a world of freedom and possibility and choice. The question is whether this was worth it, whether the freedom is worth the loneliness, whether the possibility is worth the anonymity, whether living among strangers is an acceptable price for being able to choose your own life. Your ancestors thought it was. They voted with their feet. They left. They created the modern world. They gave you the freedom you have now, the freedom to move, to change, to become whoever you want to be. And the cost of that freedom is that you live surrounded by people who don't know you, who will never know you, who are solving their own equations of freedom and loneliness. You can't go back. The village is gone, and even if it weren't, you wouldn't fit there anymore. You're too modern, too individualistic, too addicted to freedom. You would chafe at the constraints within days. You would resent the judgment and the gossip and the lack of privacy. You would want to leave. Just like your ancestors wanted to leave. Just like almost everyone who had the option chose to leave. But you can acknowledge what was lost. You can recognize that the freedom came with a cost. That the modern world solves some problems by creating others. That anonymity liberates, but also isolates. That being unknown means being free, but also being alone. You can hold both truths at once. You can appreciate your freedom while also grieving the belonging that freedom displaced. You can understand that you wouldn't actually want to go back while also honoring the ache for something that the village provided and the city doesn't. This is the work. Not to resolve the contradiction, but to live with it. To understand that you are the inheritor of a choice made by countless people before you. The choice of freedom over belonging. The choice of possibility over recognition. The choice of the stranger's face over the familiar eye. And that choice brought you here, to this life, this freedom, this loneliness, and it's yours to make something of. So where does this leave you? You're not going back to the village. You can't go back. The village doesn't exist anymore, not in the form that created total belonging. Even small towns now are full of people who moved there from elsewhere, who commute to jobs in other places, who are connected to the wider world through screens and networks. The old isolation that created the old intimacy is gone. Even if you moved to a small town tomorrow, you wouldn't experience what your ancestors experienced. You would always be the person who moved there. You would always be somewhat apart. The web of recognition that held them doesn't exist anymore because the conditions that created it don't exist. And yet the need for recognition persists. The need to be known, to be seen, to matter to someone in a way that isn't contingent on your performance or your usefulness. This need doesn't go away just because the structures that used to fulfill it have collapsed. You still carry it. Everyone carries it. It's deep in the human psyche. The need for belonging, for witness, for someone to hold your story. You try to fulfill this need in modern ways, through friendship, through romantic relationships, through community involvement, through online connections. You try to create small networks of recognition in a world that's fundamentally organized around anonymity. And sometimes it works, partially. You find people who know you well, who have seen you across time, who remember your story, who would notice if you disappeared. But it's never quite the same, because it's voluntary, because it's chosen, because it requires constant effort and maintenance, because people move and relationships end and the people who know you drift away or die, and you have to start over. There's no automatic web of recognition catching you, no village holding you whether you want it to or not. You have to build your own belonging and keep building it and rebuild it when it falls apart. And this is exhausting in a way that's hard to articulate. You think about how much energy you spend on relationship maintenance, the calls and texts and visits, the remembering of birthdays and anniversaries, the checking in, the effort to stay connected across distance and busyness, and the general drift of modern life. Your ancestors didn't have to do this. They saw people every day whether they wanted to or not. Relationships were maintained through proximity, through necessity, through the simple fact of shared space and shared life. They didn't have to work at it, it just was. But you have to work at it. You have to be intentional about connection. You have to schedule time with people. You have to make plans weeks in advance because everyone's calendars are full. You have to travel to see people. You have to use technology to maintain relationships across distance. And even then, even with all this effort, the connections are thinner than what the village provided. Because you see people occasionally rather than daily. Because you share parts of your life rather than all of it. Because the knowing is partial and requires constant updating. And there are parts of you that no one knows. Parts that exist in isolation. Parts that you carry alone because there's no one who has the full context. You have work friends who know work you. You have old friends who know past you. You have family who knows family you. You have a partner who knows intimate you. But no one knows all the versions. No one has been present for the whole story. You are fragmented across different relationships and different contexts, and you carry the burden of integrating these fragments yourself. This is the modern condition. This is what freedom looks like. You have the freedom to be different things in different contexts. The freedom to reinvent yourself. The freedom to leave behind the parts of your past you don't like. But you also have the burden of being your own integrator, of holding your own story, of knowing yourself, because no one else will know you that completely. You are free, but you are also alone in a fundamental sense. Alone with the full knowledge of who you are. And sometimes, late at night, you wonder what it would be like to be completely known by someone. Not just the good parts, not just the parts you choose to share, but the whole messy reality of you, the contradictions and the failures and the parts you're ashamed of, the full arc of you across time. What would it be like if someone held all of that? If someone witnessed all of it? Not judging, just seeing, just remembering, just knowing. The village provided this in its way. Not perfectly, not kindly, but it provided total knowing. Everyone saw everything. Everyone remembered everything. You were witnessed in your entirety, whether you wanted to be or not. And there was something about that total witness, despite its oppressiveness, that fulfilled a deep human need. The need to be seen, to have your existence confirmed by others, to know that your life registered in someone else's consciousness, to matter. You matter now in different ways. You matter to your employer because you do useful work. You matter to your friends because you provide companionship. You matter to your partner because you fulfill needs. But do you matter in that fundamental unconditional way? Do you matter simply because you exist? Because you're part of the fabric of life? Because your presence is expected and your absence would be felt? This is harder to say. And the city doesn't need you. If you disappeared tomorrow, the city would continue unchanged. Your job would be filled. Your apartment would be rented to someone else. The coffee shop would serve the next customer. The subway would be just as crowded. You would leave almost no trace. The people who knew you would grieve, but they're scattered across the city or across the world, and they would grieve privately, and then they would continue with their lives. There would be no village gathering, no collective witnessing of your absence, no shared memory holding the space where you had been. This is what anonymity means. It means you don't matter to the larger system. It means you're replaceable. It means your existence is noticed only by the small number of people you've deliberately cultivated relationships with. Everyone else are the thousands of people you pass on the street, the hundreds you interact with in minor ways. They wouldn't notice if you were gone. You're already a stranger to them. Your presence or absence is irrelevant to their lives. And you're okay with this most of the time. You've adapted. This is normal now. But sometimes the weight of it lands on you. The sense that you're floating through a world that doesn't really see you. That you could disappear and barely leave a ripple. That despite being surrounded by people, you're fundamentally alone in your existence. That no one is holding you the way the village held people. Automatically. Unconditionally. Just by virtue of shared life. You try to create your own village. You try to build a community. You join groups. You go to the same places. You create routines and patterns. You try to make yourself known to the same people over time. And sometimes it works a little. The barista starts to recognize you. The neighbor knows your name. The people in your book club remember your opinions. You create small pockets of recognition in the larger anonymity of the city. But it's fragile. The barista quits and the new one doesn't know you. The neighbor moves away. The book club dissolves when people get busy. Nothing is stable. Nothing is guaranteed. The recognition you've built can disappear overnight because it's all voluntary. Because people are mobile. Because nothing holds anyone in place. You can spend years creating recognition and then lose it all in a move or a job change or just the natural drift of modern life. And this means you're always starting over, always introducing yourself, always building from zero, always explaining your context because no one has it. You're tired of this. Everyone is tired of this. But it's the cost of freedom, the cost of mobility, the cost of living in a world where no one is trapped in place, where everyone can leave, where nothing holds except what people choose to hold. And most people, faced with the full weight of modern choice, choose to keep their options open. Choose not to get too rooted. Choose to stay ready to move. So you live with this peculiar loneliness, this sense of being surrounded by strangers, of being a stranger, of carrying your own story because no one else will carry it, of mattering to a few people in a world that mostly doesn't notice you exist. And you tell yourself, this is fine. This is freedom. This is what you wanted. The ability to be anyone, go anywhere, do anything. The village would have trapped you. The city has liberated you. And the loneliness is just the price of liberation. But late at night, when the city finally quiets and you're alone with yourself, you wonder. You wonder what was lost. You wonder what your ancestors had that you don't have. You wonder what it felt like to be held in collective memory, to walk through your days surrounded by familiar faces, to be known so completely that you never had to explain yourself, to belong so fully that you never had to work at it, to matter not because of what you did, but because of who you were to the people who shared your life. You wonder about the market square, about standing in a space where every face was familiar, where recognition was automatic, where belonging was given rather than earned, or where you were part of something larger than yourself, not because you chose it, but because you were born into it, where the web of knowing held you even when it chafed, where you were seen completely, where strangers were strange because everyone else was family, neighbour, known. And you feel something, an ache, a grief, a longing for something you never had and can never have, because you are modern, because you have freedom, because you live in a world of strangers, because the market square is gone and in its place is the endless scroll of unfamiliar faces, the crowd that doesn't know you, the city that doesn't need you, the life that requires you to be your own witness, your own rememberer, your own village. But maybe this is where the real question lives. Not whether the old world was better or worse. Not whether you should long for the village or celebrate its passing. But what you do with this inheritance, this freedom that came at the cost of belonging, this anonymity that bought you the possibility of becoming anyone. You can't go back. You can't resurrect the village. You can't create the kind of total recognition that came from a lifetime of proximity and shared struggle. That world is gone, but you can understand why you ache for it. You can understand that the ache isn't foolish or naive. It's not that you want the constraints. It's not that you want to give up your freedom. It's that you want what the constraints accidentally provided. You want to be known. You want to be seen. You want to matter in that automatic, unconditional way. You want to belong. And this wanting is not a personal failing. And it's not evidence that you're not adapting well to modern life. It's evidence that you're human, that you carry the same needs humans have always carried, the same deep psychological architecture that evolved in small groups of familiar faces, the same wiring that expects recognition, that craves belonging, that feels fundamentally wrong when surrounded by strangers. You're not broken. The situation is unnatural. Not wrong, necessarily, but unnatural. A departure from the conditions that shaped human psychology for hundreds of thousands of years. You've been living in this unnatural condition for your entire life. You don't know anything else. And yet some part of you, some ancient part, registers that something is off, that you're living in a way that doesn't match what you were built for, that the crowds of strangers and the anonymity and the freedom are all very recent developments in human history, that for the vast majority of human existence, life looked completely different, looked more like the village, more like familiar faces and total recognition and belonging that wasn't chosen but simply was. This ancient part of you doesn't care about the benefits of modern life, doesn't care about freedom or opportunity or the ability to reinvent yourself. It just knows that you're surrounded by strangers, and this feels wrong. It knows that you're not being held in collective memory, and this feels dangerous. It knows that you could disappear, and most people wouldn't notice, and this feels like a threat to survival. Because for most of human history, it would have been. Being unknown meant being outside the protection of the group. Being anonymous meant being vulnerable. Being a stranger meant being in danger. You don't live in that world anymore. Being anonymous is safe now, safer than being known in some ways. Being able to disappear is a feature, not a bug. Being surrounded by strangers who don't care about your business is freeing. But your ancient brain doesn't know this. It still responds to anonymity as danger. It still craves recognition as safety. It still feels belonging as survival. And this creates a constant low-level anxiety that you've learned to ignore but never quite escape. You self-soothe in modern ways. You accumulate followers on social media. You track how many people see your posts. You measure recognition in likes and comments and shares. You create digital versions of the village square, spaces where you're known by username if not by face, where you perform yourself for an audience, where you receive the small hits of validation that tell you you exist, you matter, someone noticed you. And this helps. A little. But it's not the same. It's not embodied. It's not the same people every day. It's not total knowing. It's curated fragments. Performance. A simulation of recognition that your brain accepts because it's better than nothing but knows isn't quite real. You also create routines. You go to the same coffee shop. You shop at the same grocery store. You walk the same routes. You try to create the conditions for recognition through repetition, through making yourself visible to the same people over time, hoping that eventually the barista will remember your order, that the cashier will recognize your face, that the other dog walkers in the park will nod in acknowledgement. You're trying to build a village in miniature, a small circle of recognition in the larger anonymity. And sometimes it works. Sometimes you become a regular. Sometimes people start to know you in that limited way. And it feels good. It feels like something important, like you're creating belonging in a world that doesn't provide it automatically. But it's always fragile. The barista quits. The store changes ownership. You move to a different neighborhood. And the recognition you built disappears. You're back to being anonymous. Back to being a stranger. Back to starting over. This is the nature of modern belonging. It's contingent. It's temporary. It requires constant maintenance. It can vanish overnight. There's no permanence to it. No village holding you in place. Just you, making effort, creating recognition wherever you can, knowing it might not last. And maybe this is okay. Maybe this is the trade. You gave up the permanence of village recognition for the freedom to move, to change, to become different versions of yourself. You gave up the unconditional belonging for the possibility of choosing who sees you and how they see you. You gave up the total knowing for the privacy to have parts of yourself that remain hidden. These are real gains. They're worth something. They're why your ancestors left, why they chose the city, why they chose freedom over belonging. But it's also okay to grieve what was lost, to acknowledge that the freedom came at a cost. That anonymity is lonely even when it's liberating. That being unknown is isolating even when it's safe. That the ability to reinvent yourself loses some of its appeal when you realize that reinvention means no one knows the earlier versions. That you carry your own history because no one else will. That the market square where every face was familiar is gone, and you're left with endless crowds of strangers. This grief is not nostalgia for a world you want to return to. It's recognition of a real loss. The loss of a particular kind of human experience that sustained people for most of history. The experience of living among faces that knew you, of being held in collective memory, of mattering automatically, of belonging without having to work at it. This is gone now for most people, replaced by freedom, by choice, by the possibility of being anyone. And the freedom is real, but so is the loss. You can hold both. You can appreciate your freedom while also honoring the cost. You can be glad you don't live in the village while also wishing you had what the village provided. You can love your ability to move and change while also craving the stability of lifelong recognition. These aren't contradictions. They're the complexity of being human in a world that's changed faster than human psychology can adapt. The ache you feel is not a problem to solve. It's information. It's your ancient brain telling you something about what humans need, about what you need, not the specific form of the village, but the underlying function. Recognition, belonging, witness, the sense that you matter to someone, that your presence is noticed, that your absence would be felt, that you're woven into the fabric of other people's lives in a way that's stable and enduring. You can try to create this in modern ways, through deep friendships, through committed relationships, through community involvement, through choosing to stay in one place long enough to become known, through showing up for people consistently, through being present in their lives, through witnessing their changes and letting them witness yours, through building recognition slowly, over years, through the accumulation of shared experience and shared memory. This is harder now than it was in the village. It requires intention. It requires effort. It requires fighting against the modern tendency to keep your options open, to stay mobile, to avoid getting too attached to any particular place or people. It requires choosing belonging over freedom sometimes, choosing stability over possibility, choosing to be known even when it constrains you. But maybe it's worth it. Maybe the ache you feel is telling you something important, that humans aren't meant to live surrounded by strangers, that freedom without belonging is hollow, that you need to be seen by someone, really seen, not the curated version you perform on social media, not the professional version you show at work, not the fragments you reveal to different people in different contexts, but the whole, messy reality of you, witnessed and remembered and held over time. You might not be able to create what the village provided. You might not be able to have that total automatic recognition. But you can create something. You can choose people to know deeply and let them know you deeply. You can commit to places and communities. You can build recognition through consistency, through showing up, through being present, through staying when modern life tells you to keep moving. This won't solve the loneliness completely. You'll still live in a city full of strangers. You'll still be anonymous in most contexts. You'll still experience the particular isolation of modern life. But you'll have something. A few people who know you. A few places where you're recognized. A small circle of belonging in the larger anonymity. And maybe that's enough. Maybe that's what the modern version of the village looks like. Not total recognition, but chosen recognition. Not automatic belonging, but intentional belonging. Not the market square full of familiar faces, but a few faces that know you well enough. Let yourself rest now in this understanding. You are not broken for wanting what the village provided. You are not failing for feeling lonely among crowds. You are not naive for longing for recognition, even as you value your freedom. You are human. You carry ancient needs into a modern world, and sometimes those needs ache. Sometimes the mismatch between what you were built for and what you live in becomes painful. And that's okay. That's information. That's your deepest self telling you what matters. You don't have to solve this tonight. You don't have to figure out how to create perfect belonging in a world organized around anonymity. You don't have to resolve the contradiction between wanting freedom and wanting recognition. You can just let it be. Let the ache be there. Let the longing be there. Let the grief for what was lost be there, alongside the gratitude for what was gained. Think about the market square one last time. Not as a place you need to recreate, but as a reminder of something true about human nature. Humans need to be known, need to be seen, need to belong. For most of history, this was automatic. The conditions of life created it whether people wanted it or not. Now it's not automatic. Now you have to create it deliberately. Now you have to choose it and work at it and maintain it. This is harder, but it's still possible. You can still create recognition, still create belonging, still find people who see you, who remember you, who hold pieces of your story. And maybe that's the work, not to long for the past, but to learn from it, to understand what it provided and why it mattered. To take that understanding and use it to make different choices now. Choices that honor your need for belonging, even while preserving your freedom. Choices that create recognition, even in a world of strangers. Choices that root you, even as you stay mobile. Choices that let you be known, even as you maintain privacy. You are living through a massive historical transition. From the world of familiar faces to the world of strangers. From automatic belonging to chosen belonging. From stable recognition to fragmented anonymity. This transition has been happening for generations. Your grandparents experienced it. Your parents experienced it. You're experiencing it. And it's hard. It's disorienting. It creates loneliness even in the midst of connection. Creates isolation even in the midst of crowds. But you're not alone in experiencing this. Everyone around you is navigating the same transition. Everyone is trying to create belonging in a world that doesn't provide it automatically. Everyone is lonely sometimes. Everyone aches for recognition. Everyone feels the weight of anonymity. You're all strangers to each other, but you're all experiencing the same thing. The same fundamental human needs bumping up against the same modern conditions. And maybe there's something in that. Some possibility for connection based on shared experience, based on mutual understanding of what it feels like to live this way, based on recognizing in each other the same ache, the same longing, the same need for something that modern life makes difficult, but not impossible. Maybe the new belonging comes from acknowledging this shared condition, from being honest about the loneliness, from helping each other create the recognition that used to be automatic. You can't bring back the village. You can't bring back the market square where every face was familiar. But you can create moments of recognition. You can see people. You can let yourself be seen. You can remember people. You can let yourself be remembered. You can build small webs of knowing in the larger anonymity. You can create belonging even when the world doesn't hand it to you. This is the work of modern life. Not to long for the past, but to take what was good about the past and find ways to create it now. Not to reject freedom, but to balance freedom with the human need for belonging. Not to give up on recognition, but to work harder at creating it. Not to accept loneliness as inevitable, but to understand it as information about what you need, and then to go create what you need as best you can. So let the ache settle. Let it be there without needing to fix it. Let it remind you of what matters. Let it guide you toward people and places and choices that create recognition. Let it help you build the modern version of the village, whatever that looks like for you. A few deep friendships, a committed community, a place you stay long enough to be known, routines that create recognition, presence that lets people see you, vulnerability that lets people know you. You have what the village couldn't give you: freedom, choice, privacy, the possibility of becoming whoever you want to be. These are real gifts. Don't minimize them. Don't dismiss them. They're why your ancestors left, and why they chose this path, why you live the way you do now. Honor these gifts. Use them. Appreciate them, but also acknowledge what was lost. Acknowledge that the gifts came at a cost, that freedom can be lonely, that choice can be overwhelming, that privacy can be isolating, that the possibility of becoming anyone can feel like being no one to everyone. These losses are real too. They deserve recognition. They deserve grief. And then, having acknowledged both, you can move forward. You can live in the tension. You can create your own belonging while honoring your freedom. You can be known by a few while remaining anonymous to many. You can build recognition while maintaining mobility. You can have what you can have and grieve what you can't, and make peace with the trade. The market square is gone. The familiar faces are gone. The automatic belonging is gone. In their place is this: endless possibility, infinite strangers, the freedom to be anyone, the burden of being no one in particular to almost everyone, the loneliness of anonymity, the liberation of being unknown, the ache for recognition, the possibility of creating it anyway. This is your inheritance. This is what you were given. This is what you work with. Not the world your ancestors knew, but the world their choices created. Not the village, but the city. Not familiar faces, but strangers. Not automatic belonging, but the possibility of chosen belonging. Not given recognition, but the hard work of creating it. You can do this work. You can create what you need. You can find people who see you. You can build belonging. You can be known. Not by everyone. Not automatically. And not in the total, complete way the village provided, but by someone, by a few people, in a few places, enough to matter, enough to answer the ache, enough to feel held. And maybe that's enough. Maybe the modern version of the market square isn't a place where everyone knows you. Maybe it's a few people who really know you, a few faces that recognize you, a few relationships deep enough to create the feeling of being held. Maybe you don't need the village. Maybe you just need to not be alone with yourself. Maybe you just need a few people who witness you, who remember you, who notice when you're gone. You can find these people. You can create these connections. You can build this belonging. It's harder now than it was. It requires more intention, more effort, more vulnerability. But it's possible. And the need for recognition hasn't changed, even though the world has. The need for belonging is still there, even though the village is gone. You can meet these needs in new ways, in modern ways, in ways that work with your freedom rather than against it. So rest now in this understanding. You are carrying ancient needs into a modern world. The mismatch creates discomfort, creates longing, creates grief, but it also creates possibility. The possibility of choosing consciously what used to happen automatically. The possibility of creating belonging that's based on mutual choice rather than proximity. The possibility of being known by people who choose to know you rather than people who simply witness you by default. This is your work. This is your inheritance. This is what it means to be human now. To live in the tension between ancient needs and modern conditions. To long for what was lost while appreciating what was gained. To ache for recognition while valuing freedom. To want belonging while choosing autonomy. To carry the past in your bones while living in the present with your choices. The market square is gone, but you remain. The familiar faces are gone, but you're still here, still human, still carrying the same needs that have always defined what it means to be human, to be seen, to be known, to belong. These needs don't go away just because the world changed. They persist, they ache, they ask for answer. And you can answer them, not perfectly, not the way the village answered them, but in your own way, in the way that's available to you now, with the freedom you have, with the choices you make, with the people you find, with the recognition you create, with the belonging you build. This is enough. This has to be enough. Because this is what you have. This is the world you live in. And you can live in it well. You can meet your needs even when the world doesn't hand you what you need. You can create recognition even among strangers. You can build belonging even in anonymity. You can be known even in crowds. The city is quiet now. The strangers have gone home to their separate lives. The streets have emptied. The noise has faded. You're alone, but maybe that's okay. Maybe aloneness isn't the same as loneliness. Maybe being alone with yourself is different than being unknown by everyone. Maybe you can be both alone and held, both free and belonging, both anonymous and recognized. You close your eyes and you think about faces. The faces you pass every day without recognition. The faces on the subway. The faces in the coffee shop. The faces scrolling past on your phone. Thousands of faces. Strangers all. And this is sad in a way. This is a loss. But it's also what allows you to be here. To be free. To be whoever you're becoming. You think about the few faces that do know you. Your friend who remembers your stories. Your partner who sees your contradictions. Your family who knew you before you knew yourself. These faces hold you. These faces recognize you. Not completely. Not the way the village would have, but enough. Enough to matter. Enough to answer some of the ache. And maybe you can live with this. Maybe this is the modern answer to the ancient need. Not total recognition, but chosen recognition. Not automatic belonging, but intentional belonging. To not the village, but something else. Something smaller, something harder won. Something more fragile, but also more precious because it's based on choice rather than proximity. You imagine the market square one last time, but this time you don't long for it. You just observe it. See it for what it was, both wonderful and terrible, both nurturing and constraining, both holding and controlling. You see the familiar faces and you understand what they provided, but you also see the price, the lack of freedom, the rigid roles, the inability to become anything other than what you were born to be. And you understand that you wouldn't trade places. You wouldn't actually go back. You would miss your freedom too much. You would miss privacy. You would miss choice. You would miss the possibility of becoming someone different than who you started as. These things matter to you. These things are worth the loneliness. These things are worth the crowds of strangers. But you can still honor what was lost. You can still acknowledge that something real was given up. You can still feel the ache without needing to fix it. You can still carry the longing without acting on it. You can hold the grief and the gratitude at the same time. You can be sad about what was lost and glad about what was gained. You can live in the tension without resolving it. This is maturity. This is wisdom. Not choosing one side or the other, but holding both. Not dismissing the past or idealizing it. Not rejecting the present or pretending it's perfect. Just seeing clearly. Seeing what was and what is. Seeing what was gained and what was lost. Seeing the trade that was made and living with the consequences. You are free. You are alone. You are unknown by most. You are recognized by a few. You are modern. You carry ancient needs. You live in tension. You ache sometimes. You are grateful sometimes. You are human. You are trying. You are creating belonging where you can. You are building recognition. You are choosing who sees you. You are choosing who knows you. You are choosing your village, even though the old village is gone. And this is enough. This is your life. This is what you make of the inheritance you were given. The freedom and the loneliness. The possibility and the anonymity. The crowds of strangers and the few familiar faces. The ache and the gratitude. The grief and the appreciation. The loss and the gain. The market square is gone. The familiar faces are gone. But you're still here, still needing recognition, and still wanting belonging, still trying to create what used to be given, still working at what used to be automatic, still building community in a world organized around individualism, still seeking connection in a sea of strangers. And you can do this. You are doing this. Every time you show up for someone, every time you let someone see you, every time you commit to staying when you could leave, every time you build recognition through presence, every time you create belonging through consistency, every time you choose relationship over freedom, every time you let yourself be known. This is the work. This is enough. This is how you live well in a world that doesn't give you what you need automatically. You create it, you build it, you choose it, you maintain it, you protect it, you honor it, and slowly, over time, you create your own version of belonging, your own recognition, your own circle of familiar faces, not the village, something else, something modern, something yours. Let this settle into you now. Let the understanding become part of you. You are living through a massive transition in human history. From stable belonging to chosen belonging. From familiar faces to strangers. From automatic recognition to earned recognition. This transition is hard. It creates loneliness. It creates ache. But it also creates possibility. It creates freedom. It creates the chance to choose consciously what used to happen by default. And you're doing it. You're navigating this transition. You're creating belonging. You're building recognition. You're finding your people. You're choosing your village. Not perfectly, not completely, but enough. It is enough to matter. enough to answer the ache, enough to feel held. So rest now. Rest in this understanding. Rest in the complexity. Rest in the tension between ancient needs and modern conditions. Rest in the knowledge that you're doing the work, that you're creating what you need, that you're not broken for wanting recognition, that you're not failing for feeling lonely, that you're human, beautifully, completely human, with all the needs and contradictions that humans carry. The city sleeps around you, full of strangers who are also carrying ancient needs, who are also trying to create belonging, who are also navigating the loneliness of freedom. You're all in this together, even though you're separate, all trying to answer the same questions, all carrying the same ache, all building recognition in a world that doesn't provide it automatically. And maybe that's the final understanding. You're not alone in being alone. You're not the only one who aches for recognition. You're not the only one who feels lonely in crowds. Everyone is navigating this. Everyone is trying to create belonging. Everyone misses something they never had. Everyone carries the village in their bones, even though the village is gone. This is the human condition now. This is what it means to be alive in this moment in history. To carry ancient needs into a modern world. To long for what was lost while appreciating what was gained. To ache for recognition while valuing freedom. To want belonging while choosing autonomy. To be both free and lonely. Both liberated and isolated. Both grateful and grieving. You can live with this. You are living with this. And maybe, in the living, you're creating something new. A new kind of belonging that doesn't require constraint. A new kind of recognition that's based on choice. A new kind of community that honors freedom. A new kind of village that exists not in a place, but in relationships, in commitments, in presence, in witness, in the few faces that choose to know you and let you know them. This is your work. This is your possibility. This is what you create with the freedom you've been given. Not the old village, but something new. Something that takes the best of what was lost and combines it with the best of what was gained. Belonging and freedom. Recognition and privacy. Commitment and choice. The familiar face and the possibility of change. You can have this. You can create this. You're already creating it. What's in the small choices you make every day? In the people you show up for? In the vulnerability you offer? In the recognition you build? In the belonging you choose? In the village you're making from the fragments of modern life? So let go now. Let go of the longing for what can't be. Let go of the grief for what was lost. Let go of the ache for total recognition. Let go of the need for the old village. It's gone. It's not coming back. And maybe that's okay. Maybe what you can create now is enough. Maybe chosen belonging is as valuable as automatic belonging. Maybe a few people who really see you is as good as being known by everyone. Maybe freedom is worth the loneliness. Let go and rest. Rest in the understanding that you're human, that you're doing the work, that you're creating what you need, that you're enough, that your longing is valid, that your grief is real, that your choices matter, that your village, however small, however modern, however hard won, is real and valuable and yours. The market square is gone, the familiar faces are gone, but you remain human, needing, creating, choosing, building, belonging, being known, being free, being both grateful and grieving, being both alone and held, being both modern and ancient, being yourself, being enough. Rest now. Let the understanding hold you. Let the complexity be okay. Let the tension relax. Let the ache soften. Let the need be met in whatever small ways it can be met. Let yourself be human in this moment, in this world, with these contradictions, with these possibilities, with this freedom, with this loneliness, with this life. You are here. You are known by someone. Or you are building belonging. You are creating recognition. You are making your village. You are answering the ache. You are enough. Rest.